Recent reports of mysterious Chinese cargo planes disappearing near Iranian airspace have sparked a critical question. Is China about to turn the Israel-Iran conflict into its next proxy war against the United States? Today, we'll analyze China's strategic calculations, examine lessons from previous proxy conflicts, and explore whether Beijing is ready to challenge Washington in the Middle East's most volatile theater. I'm analyzing one of the most consequential geopolitical questions of 2025. Can China capitalize on Middle Eastern chaos to challenge American hegemony? We'll examine three key areas. First, China's strategic interests in supporting Iran. Second, lessons from previous proxy conflicts in Kashmir and Ukraine. Third, the risks and rewards for Beijing in escalating against Washington. To understand China's potential involvement, we must first examine Beijing's massive investments in the region. China has poured over $200 billion into Middle Eastern infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative. Iran represents a crucial link in this chain, connecting Central Asian energy resources to global markets. But this goes beyond economics. China imports nearly 10 million barrels of oil daily, with significant portions flowing from Iran and the broader Persian Gulf. Any major disruption to this supply chain poses an existential threat to Chinese economic growth. China's relationship with Iran has evolved dramatically since 2021's 25-year Strategic Partnership Agreement. This isn't just about oil purchases, it includes military cooperation, technology transfers, and infrastructure development worth potentially $400 billion over 2 decades. Recent developments suggest this partnership is entering a new phase. Intelligence reports indicate increased Chinese technical assistance to Iran's ballistic missile program and air defense systems. If verified, this represents a significant escalation in Chinese willingness to challenge U.S. regional dominance. From Beijing's perspective, supporting Iran against Israel serves multiple strategic objectives. First, it ties down U.S. military resources and attention, reducing American focus on the South China Sea and Taiwan. Second, it demonstrates Chinese capability to challenge U.S. allies in their traditional spheres of influence. Third, it potentially fractures the growing Abraham Accords coalition that threatens to create a U.S.-aligned bloc from Israel to the Gulf states. Most importantly, it tests American resolve without direct Chinese-U.S. military confrontation. The most recent test of Chinese military technology came just weeks ago during the 4-day India-Pakistan crisis in early May 2025, triggered by a terrorist attack that killed 26 civilians in Kashmir on April 22. This conflict represents a watershed moment for Chinese military exports, providing the first real combat test of China's latest generation weapons systems. For the first time, Pakistan deployed modern Chinese weapons including the HQ-9 air defense system, PL-15 air-to-air missiles, and J-10C fighter aircraft in sustained combat operations. Pakistani pilots manned Chinese J-10C fighters during 4 days of clashes against India, marking the combat debut of this advanced Chinese aircraft. However, the performance results paint a complex picture that challenges assumptions about Chinese military capabilities. Analysts reported that Chinese imported systems produced disappointing results for the Pakistan military. Most critically, Pakistan's air defense grid, composed predominantly of Chinese systems like the HQ-9B and HQ-16, was reportedly unable to mount credible defense against Indian BrahMos missile strikes. When Islamabad needed these weapon systems most, Chinese-supplied radars, air defense systems, and drones failed to deliver. The failure highlighted deeper systemic issues including inadequate operator training and over-reliance on foreign technology without sufficient domestic expertise. The air-to-air combat results remain disputed. Chinese media and Bloomberg reported that Pakistani J-10C aircraft successfully shot down Indian fighter jets, while Indian sources claim they destroyed Chinese-made missile defense systems defending Lahore. This mixed performance creates a critical dilemma for Chinese military diplomacy. Chinese officials attributed HQ-9 system failures to inadequate Pakistani training rather than technological deficiencies, but Pakistan has already begun seeking Turkish SEPER air defense systems to replace failed Chinese systems. The 2025 conflict demonstrates that while Chinese military technology has advanced significantly, reliability and effectiveness under combat stress remain inconsistent, a crucial factor China must consider before committing similar systems to Iranian forces in a potentially more intense conflict environment. However, the Ukraine conflict demonstrates both the potential pitfalls of proxy engagement and the critical importance of geography in power projection capabilities. Russia's assumption that Western support for Ukraine would remain limited proved catastrophically wrong, but geographical factors played a crucial role in enabling sustained Western support. Ukraine's direct border with NATO countries Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania provided secure supply corridors for Western military aid. The 530-kilometer Polish-Ukrainian border alone facilitated massive arms transfers that would have been impossible across contested airspace or sea lanes. This geographical advantage contrasts sharply with the Iran-China dynamic. Iran's position presents both opportunities and constraints for Chinese power projection. Chinese advantages include Iran's position astride the Strait of Hormuz, giving China leverage over global energy supplies, multiple overland routes through Central Asia providing alternative supply corridors less vulnerable to U.S. interdiction, and Iran's extensive coastline offering potential naval cooperation opportunities. Chinese constraints include the fact that unlike NATO's Ukrainian supply lines, Chinese routes to Iran cross either Russian territory or politically unstable Central Asian states. U.S. naval dominance in the Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf could interdict Chinese maritime support. The 4,000-kilometer distance from Chinese industrial centers to Iran complicates sustained logistical support. The U.S. demonstrated in Ukraine that its alliance network and global logistics capabilities can sustain massive military aid operations. China has never tested comparable long-range sustained military support for a proxy under active combat conditions. China's One Belt One Road infrastructure investments in Central Asia and Pakistan provide potential logistics networks, but these remain untested under wartime conditions and vulnerable to disruption by hostile forces. Chinese strategic thinking emphasizes controlled escalation and calculated risk-taking, informed by both the Pakistani success model and Ukrainian logistics lessons. Beijing's decision-making process likely weighs several factors including military effectiveness validation, power projection capabilities, and strategic risk calculations. In a limited Chinese support scenario, China continues current levels of economic and diplomatic support for Iran while avoiding direct military assistance during active conflict. This approach offers Beijing several advantages. It maintains strategic ambiguity about Chinese intentions while supporting a key partner. It avoids triggering direct U.S. military response while still complicating American regional strategy. It preserves Chinese flexibility to escalate or de-escalate based on conflict developments. However, this cautious approach limits Chinese ability to meaningfully alter regional power dynamics or test U.S. resolve. The most aggressive scenario involves direct Chinese military presence in the region, potentially naval escorts for Iranian shipping or advisors for Iranian forces. While this would represent maximum Chinese commitment to challenging U.S. regional dominance, it also carries enormous risks. Direct Chinese military involvement would likely trigger immediate U.S. military response, potentially escalating to broader U.S.-China conflict. It would shatter Chinese relationships with European allies and Gulf Arab states. Most importantly, it could precipitate the very great power conflict China seeks to avoid while maximizing its strategic position. Based on historical Chinese behavior and current strategic constraints, the most probable Chinese approach involves calibrated escalation, gradually increasing support for Iran while carefully monitoring U.S. responses. This strategy would likely begin with enhanced economic and diplomatic support, potentially including increased oil purchases despite sanctions and stronger diplomatic backing in international forums. If US response remains limited, China might gradually introduce military technical cooperation, potentially advanced radar systems, missile technology, or cyber capabilities, while maintaining plausible deniability about direct involvement in active operations. Chinese success in establishing a Middle Eastern proxy relationship would represent a fundamental shift in global power dynamics. It would demonstrate Chinese capability to challenge US influence far from Chinese borders, potentially encouraging similar approaches in Africa, Latin America, and other regions. However, failure could expose Chinese strategic limitations and strengthen US alliance networks. The outcome of any Chinese proxy involvement in the Middle East will likely shape great power competition for the next decade. Several indicators will signal Chinese strategic decisions in coming months. Changes in Chinese oil imports from Iran during conflict periods. Sudden increases might indicate political support decisions. Chinese diplomatic rhetoric in UN Security Council debates. Stronger support for Iranian positions would signal strategic alignment. Intelligence reports of Chinese technical assistance to Iranian military capabilities. The clearest indicator of proxy relationship development. Chinese naval activity in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. Potential signal of military commitment to Iranian protection. The question isn't whether China can turn the Israel-Iran conflict into a proxy war against the United States, it's whether Beijing believes the strategic benefits outweigh the enormous risks involved. China's historical approach suggests a cautious, graduated response that tests US resolve while avoiding direct confrontation. The success or failure of this strategy will likely determine whether we're witnessing the beginning of true great power proxy competition in the Middle East, or simply another chapter in regional conflicts with global implications. Here's where I need your expertise. I've given you the strategic framework, but real geopolitics happens through backroom deals, cultural nuances, and regional insights that don't make headlines. If you're from the Middle East, East Asia, or have military or diplomatic experience, tell me, what am I missing? What local factors could completely change this analysis? And Filipino viewers, how do you think our own experience with great power competition in the South China Sea applies here? Your regional perspective could be the key insight I'm missing.